again, again, thank you for such a warm welcome. Welcome everybody to Code Academy at Toronto chapter. I'm here with our host Shiki, who is an incredible host, and my name is Gonzalo, which I'm going to be your presenter. And yeah, so just a little bit of like a quick, um, housekeeping. Again, if you have any questions, just please feel free to use the chat. I'm going to be in like full screen mode, so I won't be able to see it, but Shiki can definitely, make sure that we get any questions.
Oh, I think you are muted. I guess I clicked the wrong button. Sorry.
Yes, can you hear me now? No problem. Okay, thank you so much. Let me just do a little recap. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. This is Code Academy Toronto chapter with your host Shiki and Gonzalo as a speaker. Again, just just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, just please feel free to use the chat in whichever window you have it open. You can raise your hand, or you can come off mute. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And yeah, today's subject is personalization and analytics. We thought it would be a very interesting subject, especially for us in tech. At least for me, when I first got into technology, for me, personalization and analytics was very daunting to me. So I really hope to try to explain as much as I can. And again, it will go quick because this subject can go very deep, but we'll try to cover as much as possible. So let me share my screen with you, and hopefully it works, because last time I was on Chrome, but this time, okay. So let's see if I go on slideshow. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, it says loading.
It says loading? Okay. We'll give it a time. Let me know if it works. You know what? Okay. Let me know if you see screens.
I still see loading. I'm not sure
Okay.
that's my problem. If anyone can see the screen, please send yes in the chat section.
Oh, no, I do see it loading. So give me one second.
Okay.
Let's try this again. So one more time here. Folks, just it may be that I may not be able to go full screen. So I'll do a quick switch of browsers. I'm a very much a Firefox user, but sometimes, doesn't play nicely. But anyway, welcome Analytics and Personalization 101. My name is Gonzalo Vasquez. And yeah, a little bit about who am I. Like Shiki mentioned, I have like 10 years plus experience in technology and in software architecture. And I remember very early in my career, Code Academy helped me so much to learn how to code. It become a habit, and since then, I've really just kind of been in this space. So currently, I'm a principal architect at a company called Telus Digital. I've been enterprise architect at insurance companies. I worked at different telecoms. I've been a manager. I've been a co-founder of a small startup. But in essence, I've been, even though I've been kind of jumping around, like being close to the code and being close to development has always been very much, in my path. Things that I really enjoy. I really enjoy improv. I host a meetup called Life Questions Academies, where we ask audacious questions. I like painting, rock climbing, dancing, singing, and of course, coding and writing. Please feel free to, you can add me on LinkedIn at any time if you have any questions about this presentation. So, what is the agenda? What are we going to talk about in this hour we have together? So I want to give you an introduction of what is web analytics? I think defining what is web analytics and why is it important, it'll be a really first good step. Then we're going to talk a little about a marketing plan. Now, those are the two words as a developer you never hear together, developer and marketing. But it is so important that we understand that marketing plays a pivotal role in the applications that we build. Then we're going to be talking about personalization and A/B testing. In essence, I want to introduce you to the concept of personalization, how we used it at TELUS. And finally, we're going to be focusing a little bit of use cases for web analytics. This is where we're going to be talking about machine learning models and, in essence, what's the cool things you can do once you have data. Um, so when I talk about, I really like to start every presentation with learning outcomes. So these are the three learning outcomes that by the end of this presentation, I really hope, we can fulfill this. So after the session, you'll have a good understanding on how web analytics work. You'll have an understanding on how to create a very basic marketing plan, and you will be able to analyze using data and what we call using data-driven decision or data-driven opinions, right? Really, the idea here is that data is really at the center of everything we do, especially in software development. So the idea of like you bringing data to the forefront, and data will always triumph opinion. And when you will have your opinion plus data, that combination is very powerful. Okay. So any questions before we get into the content? I will try not to. I will try to slow down, but sometimes we do go from 0 to 100. But again, if you have any questions, just please feel free in the chat. We can take them, and yeah, let's start. Okay, analytics 101. So the first question is, why do we need analytics? Well, analytics helps us to do a lot of things, right? It can help us make informed decisions, which goes back to using data to make opinions or to derive actual decision making. It also is a good way to gain awareness, right? If you're launching a new product, you're launching a new website, having analytics to understand, the awareness of it, it's very powerful. And finally, the two things is it can help you measure adoption, right? If you have a new app that you developed and it's on the App Store, understanding, is it being adopted, how many downloads it has, all these are data points that can influence your decision making or even influence your product roadmap. And finally, we talk about measure engagement. Engagement is very powerful. So adoption is one thing. You could build the most beautiful app in the world, and you could have maybe a user base of millions of people. But if they're not downloading it, if they're not engaged with it, if they're not, if every time they load the app, they leave after 2 seconds, that's where, engagement becomes very, very powerful to measure. And really, when we think about analytics, you can really break it down into three parts. There's a tracking. So, there's events that are being tracked when you go to the website. We're going to be calling these events as like beacons that get fired. All this data eventually goes to a storing event, or also is known as a tag manager. You've probably heard of Google Tag Manager, Adobe Analytics. So in a sense, that stores all the events and all the data that you're collecting. And finally, you get to visualize the data. Again, this is very powerful because in order, like, you're doing all this effort of making sure that you're tracking, where your user clicks, where your user dropped off. Maybe you're, collecting heat maps, you're collecting mouse clicks. But at the end of the day, if you don't know what to ask the data, you're just going to end up, just collecting more data. So it's very important. One of the first things I learned in analytics is, and asking the question is sometimes way more powerful than even the implementation, right? And common questions could be such as, what is the viewership of my website? How many download apps or how many downloads do I have for my app? Or can I increase the conversion of my newsletter? All these questions are really mapped into a marketing strategy and at the end into how you set up your website. So always start, I like to think about it, always start with the question, because the question you can in a sense work backwards and then understand, if the question is how many users do I need to be profitable, that's a great question to start, because then it gives you good data points on what to collect, and eventually it gives you the insight or the intelligence on how to act on that. So that's the concept I want us to think about, right? There's tracking data, there's storing those events, and there's visualizing. And these three buckets are very important. And we're going to be using these three buckets like overall as a repeating theme in the presentation. So data, insights, which is, an action. Data, insights, action. Okay. So how do I implement analytics in my site? That's one of the first questions that we get. So today it's actually fairly easy to add analytics to most websites. Analytics, it gives you a URL. You drop that URL and you put it in your website. And that is doing in essence is you're starting to collect events or collect data, feeding it to Adobe Analytics, and eventually visualizing the data. Right now, how can when you're collecting data, not every data is the same, right? For example, page views, how many views your website gets, that is awareness, right? That means like you want to improve the awareness of your website. If it is exit links, right? So how many people maybe they went through my blog post, but I lost them at page 20. That is engagement. That is how engaged are your customers or your users with your product. And the third one is adoption, right? So that one, it could be something like a call to action where it says, hey, buy here or email me here or a click here. Those are call to actions or CTAs, right? And that triggers adoption. So you can start by very simply, what is the question that you're asking from your data? Do you want to increase awareness? Do you want to increase engagement? Or are you mainly looking for adoption, right? And depending on which bucket you use, like the implementation is different. Now, in the example below, it's very simple, right? We have our website, but in this case, we're going to track a click. So a click means that it's actually tied to how the logic to your website. So that is a part of adoption, right? A call to action. The user clicks on that, it fires at where we call in analytics an event. That event gets captured in Adobe Analytics, and finally I can visualize it. Very straightforward, right? Click event, fire a user clicks, I fire an event that gets collected in Adobe Analytics and finally visualized. This is quite different than I would say page views, for example, because for page views, I really don't have to do anything. I just have to enable analytics and it starts collecting the number of page views. But adoption is different, engagement is different. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Like when you're firing this event, what does that mean? What is this event that what did this event look like? And a little spoiler alert, it's just data. And this is called the data layer, right? So the data layer, it is a JavaScript object that is literally used to pass information from your website to your tag manager. You can open any website that is using this convention, and you could go to window.datalayer, and you'll see that is the way that we communicate to our tag manager that, hey, something happened. Now, the data layer is a global object that can live in the window, meaning it's accessible throughout your whole life cycle of the application. Okay, so in the example below, where we had that click, this is what it would look like if you were actually writing the code, or in this case, you're doing the implementation, or the also known as tagging of this event. You have your button on click. Then you have your data layer, and the data layer is simply an array. So you just push to it. And what are you pushing to it? An event. That event is, hey, checkout button. So now on the analytics side, it's going to capture the event, other information such as, hey, where was the mouse? Where was this user coming from? What was its IP address? And all this information gets bundled. And at the end, what you see on Google Analytics is the number of people that have clicked on your checkout button. So this becomes, again, very powerful because, one, you have a defined way to share data with your tag manager. And number two, If you could imagine that this is, for example, an e-commerce website. Well, this click event, it could be a buy now. You can actually link it to sales. So this is where, having a very good marketing plan or understanding, like it's not just I'm firing my event. It's I'm firing my event, but something is happening, right? I'm fulfilling a sale. I am redirecting the user to another website. I am doing affiliate marketing. In essence, whatever happens, you can start to connect the dots. And analytics is very much like Legos, right? You're just going to be building blocks on top of blocks. So I have a couple screenshots to give you. So some are from my personal website, others are from another e-commerce store. But let's talk about these, high level. We've talked about awareness, right? So what is awareness? How can we measure awareness? Well, awareness could simply be number of page views, length of page session, which is like the amount of time that the user was in our site. And once we hook that up, we start to get the insight, right? So we have the data. Now we're in the insight. So now I can look at my graph and see, okay, this is from January to December. That's my X column is months, and my Y column is 0 to 80. 80 being the, in this case, the peak amount of users, and obviously I can tell from here it's like, okay, good number of users, but if I look at my session duration, it's very low. So it looks like, at least from here, I can say that most people are visiting the site, but leaving very early, right? Spending a second in it. Obviously, the bounce rate, meaning the people that are coming to the site and leaving, it's high. So, okay. So again, we have data and we can infer some insights from it. Now let's talk about engagement, right? Okay. So how do we measure engagement? Well, you can measure engagement in many ways. One example could be your active users versus and your IP location, right? So here I have two charts. The one in the bottom left is how are your active users trending over time? So I have number of active users. Again, time. It's a time series graph. So in the bottom I have my months. In the top I have, in the y-axis I have my number of users, and I can see, a time graph on how my users are interacting and are engaged with the site. Okay, so now let's look about where are my users coming from. Perfect. So I have their IP address, so I can do a geolocation lookup, and I can see, okay, most of my users are, from India, some from United States, some from Canada. Amazing. So now it gives you a little bit more understanding of, who is your user base? How are they engaging with you? And when are they engaging with you? You could feel that this could be very popular or very powerful if, for example, you're launching a website that is related to a public holiday or is related to a shopping holiday. Then you start to layer data. Very much the concept of Legos, right? The more layered data you have, the more insights you have. Okay. Also very important metric. So in this case, we could use two ways to measure adoption: the referral link and the basic HTTP refer header. So that means is where are my customers or my users coming from? Very similar. I have a bar chart where in the x-axis I have the number of months, and in the y I have, in this case, the number of acquired users in the thousands. And I can see that most of my users, in the dark blue, came from social media. Some of them came from direct, some of them came from organic search, and paid users. I ran a paid campaign in the month of July, August, uh, and September. So obviously, I have a peak there. So you can start to map these to your marketing campaigns, right? Like at the end of the day, having this data allows you to, make better decisions because adoption, engagement, and awareness, they all, right. And that's the thing about marketing, is marketing, it is not cheap. Marketing tends to be very expensive. So this is why we spend so much time analyzing the data. Because if you have a budget of $100, you got to make it. You got to make those $100 the best that they can go. So again, just a small recap. We talked about awareness, page views, page session. We talked about engagement, looking at active users, looking at their location. We talked about adoption, looking at referral links and HTTP refer to see like where our users came from. And even this one is so powerful. So the basic HTTP refer that is part of the HTTP2 standard that you can add to any header request, and it allows you to even know, where was the user before they clicked on my site. Again, very powerful to understand your user base better. Okay. So far, any questions about our analytics one-on-one? We talked about how to implement analytics. I introduced the concept of data layer, the idea that, behind the scenes, every event is really just JSON. And we talked about that, depending on your strategy, one, you need to have a strategy, but depending on your strategy, is it awareness? Is it engagement? Is it adoption? You'll have a marketing plan. So in this very basic example, let's have a marketing plan. And let's say our use case is to increase the views to our blog post site. And we want to increase our user views by 20%. Again, arbitrary number. But using that same model of data, insights, and action, we can start to ask ourselves some questions. The data first is like easy. What is our current user view? If we want to increase by 20%, we have to have a baseline. Okay, what is the current user views of this blog post? Once you go into, seeing, in this case, let's say we want to build awareness and engagement, right? You would take this data from current views. We looked at maybe geolocation, maybe we looked at session time. And let's say that, during our insights, we found a very interesting correlation that most of our user base visit our site on the weekends versus on the weekdays. So that's your action, right? Your action is, okay, now you're going to launch new content, but you're going to launch it on the weekends versus the weekdays. And the idea, and really marketing is all starts like a hypothesis, right? And your hypothesis is by launching new content during the weekends, you predict to increase user views to the blog post by 20%. With that simple statement, that becomes your hypothesis that then drives your marketing campaign. So we can see why it is very important to even before even start to the data, even before even setting up, Google Analytics and tag managers, what do we want to do? What are we asking our data? So in this case, increasing user views. That's the data. You went through that. That's the insight. You found a correlation. And finally, you take an action. Now, this view is very simplistic, but the beauty of it is that it is simplistic. So after the action, it goes back to the data because now you have new data. Now you have number of current user views on the weekends, and you keep driving insights and you keep driving actions. So this loop, this arrows is actually a loop. So after you finish your action, you go back to your data, you go back to your insight, and you go to reaction. So again, very powerful model with just really 3 steps. So any questions so far on, very basic, how to increase user views? I'll take a little coffee break while we think about this.
I
Okay.
like the concept you talk about. It's a loop. Like after you take action, you need to go back to the data because you have new
Correct.
data.
Correct. Exactly, Shiki. Like in essence, any action that you've taken based on the insight, you have changed your data set, right? So we're going to talk a little about machine learning models and what that means, but very basic, just knowing that changing the data or adding new data triggers this cycle again. So we've kind of touched a little bit about Adobe Analytics, and we've kind of talked about very basic. How do you get user views? How do you get awareness? How do you get engagement? Um, Now we're going to talk about personalization and A/B testing. So this is probably more on the advanced side of when we do analytics, but I really want to make a case here that when you start to do analytics, this is the kind of things that you can start to do with your data. And, personalization, we see it everywhere. You go to netflix.com, you'll have a different shows than your friend or your partner, right? We go to A/B testing. We like A/B testing is such a powerful model to try different things. So we're going to be talking about, again, personalization and A/B testing as an evolution of data inside action, but still following that same framework. Okay, like I mentioned, same framework, data inside action. So what does our data tells us? So again, it's very important to know that when we analyze our data, there usually is a business goal, right, that we want to attain. Now, if you are working for yourself or you're building a blog post, maybe these are smaller business goals. But once you start working with companies and you work with the analytics team, these are the business goals that they're mostly thinking of. Customers with high propensity to buy. How do we target those customers? Customers with a really high lifetime value. These are maybe app users or code users that are very, very just bring a lot of value to you. That could be subscription based. Prospect customers. How do you get people that are not part of your user base? And finally, customers with high propensity to churn. That means is what are the customers that are really, about to leave us? So a common practice before we do personalization or A/B testing is something called segmentation or segments. And in essence, what that means is that you create a lot of different, we call them traits, but think about it as data points. And you put all these data points together, and together they create a segment. So, for example, let's say your customers with a high propensity to buy, they always come at 8 a.m. and they're always visiting us from a mobile device. So you take those two data points, a mobile device, and always visiting us at 8 a.m., and you create a segment. That means that every next customer that falls between the segment, meaning it's almost like a Boolean mobile app and visiting website at 8 a.m. If those two conditions are met, you have a customer with a high propensity to buy. Amazing. Now let's look at it the opposite way. Let's look at a customer with a high propensity to churn. Maybe this is a customer that is still on a desktop and they keep visiting our cancellation page. Oh no. So again, two conditions that have to be met. Customer is visiting us on a desktop device and customer keeps, looking into cancellation policies. That is a customer that has a high propensity to leave us. So again, if those two conditions are met, then they fall into the customers a high propensity to churn. So again, why is this powerful? Because when before, if you can see, rather than start to just look at this graph, and I can see very powerful, but every single of these customers or users, they're rich, they're us, they're people, right? And this is where we can start to use some of more marketing, I want to say, more marketing engines in order to target these customers. And really, the idea is to not treat every customer or user the same, right? There are going to be users that are going to be mapped more to the values or or the use case of your application than others. So this is why creating that segment for your specific customers becomes powerful. And again, creating the segment, that's just the data part, right? Now let's move to the insight. Okay. I really like this example on like extreme example of personalization. You can imagine you go to a store, you pick up a bottle of pop, and it has your name on it. Like that, even just that itself gives you a better experience. And we as humans, we have this propensity to get closer to the things that talk to us, right? In this case, if my name is Tom, I'm gonna, oh, amazing. I'm gonna pick up, the bottle that says Tom. So it is very much the same psychology in the websites. When you visit a website, you want it to have your fingerprint. You want it to feel like your identity, who you are, or what you like is represented in this website. Um, I'm not talking like the one caveat I'll make, like privacy definitely is very important. So, my rule of thumb is just make sure that, when you're tracking, always doing it in a way that cause any anti-patterns, or you're doing it in a way that is responsible. So this is an example of extreme personalization. And, you know, then we talk about, okay, Gonzalo, I understand you. I get you. Personalization is important. People like to feel like individuals. They don't like to feel like the website is generic. They want to feel like the website was built for them. Okay, let's start to create some segments. Look at your users, right? And then start to divide your users. Now, again, you have to ask yourself the question. But based on the question, you're going to start to segment your users. And you could segment them based on their demography. Uh, you could say, like, you know what? I only want users that are age 16 to 35 and are male. Or I only want females from this country, from this browser type. Now, you see that, demography, where they're coming from, their gender, their occupation, most of that Google Analytics can give us. Same with geography, same with technology. When we get more into like the behavioral aspect or the psychological aspect, this is where, again, very much like a building block, you can use data from other resources to build a richer segment of this customer. And again, why are we doing this segmentation? The hypothesis is the better our segment and the more people fall in this segment, then we have a very specified either personalization or experience for this subset of customers. So in essence, think of your users and your customers as subsets and think about what makes them different, but also what makes them together. What aligns them to what you would like to accomplish on your application, or what aligns to things that you don't want. If you're building, let's say, an app that is 18 plus, you would not have a segment that is, less than 18. So your business requirements, the actual app that you're building or the website will definitely influence the type of customers that you're trying to segment and you're trying to reach. So any questions so far on, we talked about what is personalization. We talked about creating segments in order to personalize those. And the next example, I'm going to give you a case study on how this works in real life. So this is so the use case is a website called tellus.com. So for those that are not familiar, tellus.com or Tellus is a Canadian telecom, and behind the scenes we use personalization. Now it's a little bit more. In essence, what we have done is we build personalization on the server side versus on the client side, but the concept is very similar. Let's say I'm a cat and I'm visiting the website. The first thing that the website is going to tell me is, hey, are there any offers for this cat? I know that it's a cat. So we use a tool called Adobe Target. And Adobe Target allows us to do targeting. and says, you know what? For our cat, we actually do have an offer for them. And we're like, great. We go to Contentful. Contentful, it's a CMS. And then we say, okay, this is the content for our cat. And then we show the personalized content. So a lot of things are moving here, but really the concepts are the same. Now we're going to be talking about my tools. So Adobe Audience Manager, that is how we create segments. Adobe Target, that is the tool that we do targeting or A/B testing. Adobe Analytics, that's our tag manager. Contentful, that is just where data resides. Personalization API, that's a middleware that again was built in-house at Atellus, but all it does, it just orchestrates this together. And the website. So everything we've talked about, either you could do it at an enterprise version or you can do it in a blog post because the concepts are the same. So any questions around our, how we personalize at telos.com?
Maybe I want you to further explain the content for CMS. So that's where your data is collected. Is
Yeah,
that
that's a great question, Shiki. So in this case, at least for tells.com, all our data is separated. It is not actually living in the applications itself. Um, when we build the applications, one of the main concepts, and if you dial into the software in like intro to software, but one of the main patterns is a separation of concerns, meaning that very similar to this picture, how we have every tool, it does one responsibility. Well, this is an architectural pattern that we try to follow at TELUS. So, for example, our Contentful CMS, that is only for content. So all the marketing content lives there, all the offers lives there. When you go to TELUS.com, all the data for the content is living in Contentful, which again, it's just that headless CMS. Again, we talked about Adobe Analytics. That is just the tag manager. We use the data layer. So again, we can go on telos.com. You can open the inspect window and type window.data layer, and you will see the data layer we're talking about. And again, using Adobe Target, which allows us to do targeting. And really, the Adobe Target is a simple yes or no engine. It says, yes, I do have an offer for this specific segment, or no, I don't have an offer for this specific segment. In Adobe Target, you can see that it talks to something called Adobe Audience Manager. That is actually where we store and we define our segments. And very similar to what we talked about segments, our segments are driven by our business goals, retention of customers, new products, upselling a product. Every single, those are segments that are part of Adobe Audience Manager, and they allows us to do better targeting.
we see several questions here. So Alex
Sure.
is asking, what's the best language to take your analytics and convert that to insights?
That is a really great question, Alex. So if you were to, in a sense, use Google Analytics, you could just very simply click and draw, right? Like Google Analytics already comes with a lot of predefined blocks. But the best language I want to say to analyze data would be Python, in my personal experience. Why Python? Python is a really great programming language to do data processing and data manipulation. And at the end of the day, we had seen that all what we're collecting is data. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the end of how we can use machine learning, but at a concept, yeah, Python is a great programming language for you to start to analyze the data. But even before there, I want to say baby steps. Just even defining what do I want to capture, what do I want to measure, and what are my insights. Once you have a rich collection of data, that's when you can definitely open up Python and run and bunch and and start asking questions to your data set.
Okay, there's another question.
Yes.
So Ricardo is asking, do you share your insights with Unix researchers so that we can build a bridge between quantitative and quantitative, am I reading this right? Research methods.
Yes, well, that is also yeah, really good question. So we do share our insights, right? So very much what we're seeing now is we're seeing a view from a development point of view. But yeah, but you know, when we're defining our data insight action in the insights part, we usually have either meetings with we call them personalization primes, and in essence they allow us to be like analyze our data. We sit together with UX designers, with UI designers, and to understand like if it's like, for example, if we're building a form and we keep seeing that people never complete the form, we have the data, we have a heat map, but that's when you take this data with your designers, with your developers, with your marketing primes, and together you derive the insights from it and you build that action. So, and yeah, really good question. And yeah, so the answer is yes, definitely. Okie dokie. So we talked about, personalization. So again, personalization, we see it a lot in Tellus.com. Like I mentioned, if you go to Netflix, you go to Nike, you go to most big brands are doing personalization. The most common one, Amazon, right? And Amazon has a very rich recommendation engine, but we're gonna be talking about that in the next slide. One of the things that you can also do, and very much goes in hand to the question that Ricardo had, is if you want to do research, if you want to actually do quantitative research and qualitative research, which means, like what is the data that I'm trying to, like, what is the data telling me? A really good way to start is with an A/B test, right? In essence, an A/B test allows you to have two versions of your website, or two versions of your feature that you're building, or even two versions of a banner, and you start with a hypothesis, right? You would say, hey, version A will have better conversion than version B because it has the new design. In this case, it's backwards. But very similar to a blind test in medicine, you can do this with A/B testing, where you literally start to, again, segment or divide your user base, so you can just be, very arbitrary, say 50% of my user base will go to version A, 50% of my user base will go to version B. Version A, we call that control, which means that these are the users that are not of the changes that you're going to be trying. Version B, we call those the variation. You can have multiple variations. In the past, I think we've run at TELUS like 16 different variation types. But the idea is this is a time-bounded um, a, experiment with a very strong hypothesis at the beginning that you're trying to either um, either validate or invalidate based on your test. So again, very powerful. And you may have seen this outside in the real world when you may go to a website or a friend goes and it may look different. This is what's happening behind the scenes. So again, when is A/B testing a good use case? When you're trying to launch a new feature, and you're not sure, you don't want to affect your whole user base. When you want to introduce a new product, maybe, or maybe there's a new part of, or maybe there's a whole new capability on your app that you would like to test. So again, A/B testing is very powerful. You could obviously layer A/B testing and then personalize the A/B test. It can get complex, but just knowing that having an A/B test, having a control sample, having a variation, and again, running it long enough to be statistically significant is very important. If you run a test and maybe you're trying new functionality and it's only for, let's say, a week, if you're not Google, a week may not be enough, right? So you may need to run it for 3 months, 4 months to get enough user data to validate your experiment. Other things you can do: email marketing. I mean, we get exposed with this one on our daily basis, but you can start to tie in email marketing to your marketing plan. In-app messaging. If you're a mobile developer or you're getting into mobile app, in-app messaging is such another really good way to garnish engagement from your users. And really, the idea is that every action that you're doing should have a business goal associated to it. Perfect. So, when we think of analytics, we kind of really, this session was just more like scratching the surface. But there's so much more that you can do with analytics. And I think this is where the question came, is like, what's a good programming language? Well, Python and R are really two great programming languages to do data processing. And this is what you eventually can do with analytics. You can start to build machine learning models. And what could these models be? Well, let's say you can build predictive models that you can start to predict your customer's behavior based on an action. You can start to build recommendation systems. You have historical data, and then you can start to predict and say, hey, based on, let's say, what my user likes to see or what my customer likes to buy, I'm going to recommend them, option A or option B. You can do forecast and targeting, where you can say, I know that during this time, I'm going to get a lot of users. So I'm going to start to, in a sense, do targeting before it even happens. Or you can do churn rate forecasting, where you say, every year I lose 100 customers to churn. And you can start to, again, using the data that you have. And this is why this is like the next step, because you really need test data or training data or historical data. But looking at the past, for example, you take a look in the last 2 years, the 20 customers that have unsubscribed from your service. Based on that, you can start to, again, derive insights and have an action. And the action could be a machine learning model that tells you, hey, by the year 2024, 20 more customers are going to leave you. How can you negate that? How can you make sure that does not happen? So machine learning model, it is very, very, very powerful, but definitely not starting from here. It's very important, right? Because you really need to have a base understanding of what are you asking the data, how are you tracking that, how are you visualizing it, and then once you have accumulated enough data, then you can start to play with it and really analyze it. Perfect. And this is really the Q&A section. So just to, because I really like to go back to the learning outcomes, but let's just very quickly kind of talk about what we talked about. So we talked about web analytics and how they work. We talked about the data layer and how using a tag manager like Adobe Analytics or Google Tag Manager allows you to start to, track what the customer is doing. Then we talked about, having a very good marketing plan. Then I introduced, data, insight, actions. Having the very strong marketing plan and knowing what data to ask is very powerful. And then the third one is, once you have this data, it then allows you to make data-driven decisions, such as maybe you have to redesign your application because you can see that, based on how it's designed, your customers are not engaged. Or you need to create a new marketing campaign because you want to grab new users that you've never, used that you've never targeted before. So just having that, really bare bones understanding on data insight action, how do you capture events, how do you segment those customers, and how do you target them, it is a very good basis on personalization and analytics for a software developer. So any questions that you have, um, yeah, please feel free to put them in the chat. Like, definitely, like, as a developer, you don't get very close to analytics a lot unless you work with a team, but you do get close to data, right? You're working with data every single day. So just know that analytics are not just on the marketing side. Analytics can be on the development side too. Any data allows you to make decisions, and in a sense, you're starting to use data over opinions.
We see a question from Alex. So, what are the fundamental skills and knowledge to get into analytics and personalization?
Yeah, no, Alex, that's a great question. So, like, really, just having that kind of base understanding on I want to say statistics, it's a really good step. So, there is a book that I would like to recommend. It's called Open Statistics, Open Interest Statistics. Um, it is an open source book, but also allows you to understand, even before getting into what we talked about, just allows you to understand how to think about data, right? At the end of the day, this is a great book because it gives you data sets and allows you to ask questions to it. um, the other one that I would love to, eventually, once you kind of build up to it, is a website called uh, Kaggle, or Kaggle, I think, depending on the pronunciation. This is a very good website because once you start to get into, okay, I have my data set, I can understand some mean, medium, I can have my min, max, I have my averages, I can start to plot them into a line graph. The next example is, okay, how can I use machine learning in order to build machine learning models from that data? And asking ourselves that question, it is so powerful. So I would say, Alex, to answer your question, open intro statistics would give you a really base understanding on statistics. And again, from a development point of view, if Python it's definitely in your wheelhouse, getting exposed to Kaggle and kind of working a little bit and massaging the data, it's a great skill to have, because you won't realize, like, the hardest part or the most consuming part of analytics is actually getting the data in the right size or in the right format. It never comes in the right way.
Right, I might have a question. So you talk about the Adobe Target, which well distributes the A/B testing for you. But is that just randomly distributing, or it has some sort of strategy to choose the people who gets A, who gets B?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shiki. So if we talk of tools of Adobe Target, they actually use segments to decide which version am I going to show. So, for example, if the customer falls into the segment of propensity to churn, then Adobe Target will see, okay, show them an offer. You definitely want to retain them. If the segment is, oh, there's a customer that is a brand new customer, hey, show them the brand new iPhone. So depending on the segment is what you're showing the customer.
That makes sense.
Awesome. So folks, any other questions about analytics or personalization? Again, this is a one-on-one. So really what we talked about was very high level. But as a developer, having that a little bit of more understanding on marketing and analytics can definitely give you a really good edge. And even, coming back to bringing those insights back to researchers, back to developers, back to your managers, it is very powerful. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question for Ken. So I'm planning for a career change in data analytics, but my college degree is in sociology and education. Very cool. What's a for me? Would it be useful to build up a portfolio of data analytics projects while I have done learning? 100%. So I want to say, like, building a blog post, it is very, very, very powerful. Um, and even in the blog post, just talking about, these are my experiments. Like I mentioned, uh, Kaggle is a very good way to get into data analytics because it allows you to play with real data. The most common Kaggle example is you get the test or you get a data set of Titanic, and it's your job to build a prediction model based on the different levels of the tickets the person's had in the Titanic. Did the person survive or did they not? But based on that, because you have historical data, you can start to build a very good. You start to look at features. You start to look at their age. You look at their cabin. You look at their gender, and based on these, you start to develop a machine learning model that then can predict. Yeah, if this user or this person would have existed, they would have survived or they would have drowned. But having definitely, I want to say, like, playing with Kaggle and writing in a blog post of what you're doing, it is very powerful as a way to get recruiters' attention and as a way to even self-learning and self-documenting your journey. So great question too. Thanks, Anyun.
All right. So I might have another question for you. I feel like your position is sort of like between the customer and the developer because I feel like you can directly deal with the customer problems, like the values, and you ask questions and turn your business value into action. So
Correct.
it's that's like sort of what you are doing right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah, so like if I were to, I was doing a little bit more when I was working in the analytics team, but very similar, right? Like at TELUS, we have data inside actions. We have a business goal. You know, we want to have sell the new iPhone, for example. We create a segment for those people, and again, that business goal usually is influencing technology, right? It's influencing how we're going to show the phone. It's influencing our marketing campaign. It's influencing our targeting. It's influencing our machine learning models. Like, who should get the phone first, right? Is it loyalty customers? Is it prospect, meaning that they're not customers yet? So 100%, like analytics is very much mapping business requirements to technical ones. And the more you can do that in your career and the more you can do that as a developer in your practice, I feel the more well-rounded developer you will be, because you won't just understand the technology, which is like, okay, amazing, I'm going to build this new API because I need this new data, because I need to connect X, Y, and Z. But you'll understand why, and you'll understand, what are you trying to reach? What are you trying to measure? What impact does your code have? So just even asking those questions is very, very powerful. Even for me, it allows me to have better understanding of what I do as a developer.
What you said because as a developer you can like achieve your dream, the
Mhm.
API, the web page you want to make, but you need some sort of measurements about
Yes.
the product. Does
Yeah.
people like it, and how long they are willing to stay on your
Hmm.
product, and are they loyal? So those are the questions we should ask ourselves. And
Exactly.
how to measure that is by analytics and personalization, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I didn't know personalization and A/B testing. That's a test, right? Exactly that. Just getting that data set, understanding it, is that insight, is asking the questions, and then you do your actions, right? And it could be that the action could be like, oh, you know what? I My website was really slow, so all I needed to do was add caching. But you won't know that unless you have the data, or you could know that. But if you measure it first, your story becomes so much more interesting. So much more interesting.
Yeah, I think those data will tell you something yourself doesn't
Hmm.
notice, but the data
Hmm.
show that to you.
100%, Shiki.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, do we have any other question for Gonzalo? So, Gonzalo, could you share your LinkedIn profile
Sure.
in the
Of
chat
course.
section? So, if you guys who have further questions, feel free to send him a direct message through LinkedIn.
Of course. Yes. So I will paste my website, and again, like Shiki mentioned, you have my LinkedIn. Um, Feel free to ask any questions that you have. Like no question is a bad question, and yeah, like I'm like you mentioned, I'm very excited to do this, and really really happy that we have such a vibrant community here. And again, Shiki, thank you so much for hosting this, and I look forward to coming back.
Oh, nice. We are glad to have you here, and you always bring us amazing content.
Yes, and you do have any suggestions for some content, please. I'm also all ears. I love suggestions.
All right. So if there's no more other questions, we're going to wrap up for today. I hope you guys all get something meaningful and useful. So we will see you next time. Bye bye, guys.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.